So this is Real World Audio, and I'm taking you on a journey. And Herb Reichert, he has been an inspiration to me since my early audio days, and I've been reading his writings. At that time, he wrote for Positive Feedback, and now he writes for Stereophile, and really, I think every single one of his writings is good to read. So whatever he says, it's always something really enjoyable and really educational to read about it. So here it is. Over a year ago, he wrote about this phono preamp, and it's a Japanese kit, and it is kind of very unusual because you can adjust the turnover frequencies on it. What does that mean? It means that when you are listening to records, then just about 99.9% of the records are done with the RIAA EQ, because that has been made. RIAA was made as the standard for LPs, so most companies recorded using that EQ to record all their records. But before the time that the RIAA became the standard, then some companies had their own settings. So for example, here there's one that says London, and as you can guess, the British studios like to do their own jam, and here there's Columbia, and the Columbia studio, recording studios, they also had their own idea on how to create an EQ for the records. And eventually, when you look at the British and the Columbia EQs, they are pretty close to the RIAA EQ, which is basically the one that RCA used, and you can play all of them with the modern RIAA phono stage. However, the Columbia records and the British records, they will not sound optimal. They will sound, as in the case of Columbia, either inferior or London's maybe even distorted if you play on a standard phono stage. And that's why a phono stage like this can become a revelation for you, because when you are able to choose the EQ for your record, then you will hear it properly as it was recorded. And here I'm not thinking about we have to become obsessive about what the studio engineer heard in the recording room, because frankly, who could care even less about what a person who we don't know heard in a studio room that we never have seen, and probably has terrible room acoustics compared to the concert hall anyway. But what really matters here is that if you do not play back a recording at the proper EQ, then you are missing about 90% of the potential that it has. So for example, when you are reading about people comparing different pressings of a recording, then almost always that pressing will come out as the best sounding, for which they have the most optimum phono EQ curve. And that's why Columbia recordings are regarded as second-rate recordings, because they use EQ that is different enough from the standard RIAA that when you play it back on a gear that cannot choose the Columbia curve, then it will sound frankly lifeless and not very good. And if you can hold on for a split second, let me get a Columbia record for you. here it is. I found it. It's George Sea, Beethoven Symphonies, and it uses the Columbia EQ. And you see the cover is absolutely trash, so most of the discerning audiophiles, if you found such a box set in a garage sale, it would go straight into the dump, right? No one would have second thoughts about it. And if you put these records on your average phono stage that cannot select these curves, then it will be like, not bad, pretty okay, but whatever. I have like RCAs that sound 10 times better than this. But put it on a phono stage where you can set the Columbia EQ, and then you will find out that out of any recording of Beethoven symphonies, this is by far the best sonics. It's just insanely good sounding. And you will find out that Columbia recordings have just so much more potential in them. They're so much better recorded than what you would think based on what people ever comment on Columbia recordings. And it's not because they don't know about it, but it's because no one has, that there's so few phono stages that can play the Columbia EQ, and people simply never heard what those recordings are capable of. Now, if you get a phono stage like this where you can select the EQ, then you will be able to listen to Columbia recordings. So if you have that question, shall I get a phono stage that can choose like different EQs? If the Columbia records, Columbia label, and all of those other labels which use the Columbia EQ, that use their studios, you have a lot of recordings on those pressings, then my answer is definitively you have to seek out a phono stage that can play Columbia for you. Otherwise, you will be missing out 90% of the experience. So back to this article and back to Herb and why I really want to just spend a little time with this with Herb's writing, because he wrote what he writes about himself just resonates with me like so deeply. And well, I came from a different situation, but I can also say that I could not afford any audio gear in the past at all, and I was just dreaming about audio gear just like Herb did. And as he's writing that he went through his audio journey, and that's pretty much my audio journeys too. And he said like each brand's unique, except for each brand's unique wiring layout, chassis construction, finish, the two amps I repaired were mostly boring. And this is why I am not a professional audio repairman, and I did not get into audio professionally, because frankly, for me, most amplifiers are boring, and I don't want to live my life spending 90% of my time with fixing broken, boring gear. That kind of sounds like a torture for me, and it looks like it was a torture for poor Herb too. So, circuit-wise and sonic-wise, they were quite similar to each other and generally unremarkable. After fixing and auditioning scores of these crusty boxes, I realized that the better sounding ones, the ones that were neither slow, dull, nor screechy, employed large, high-quality transformers and simplest circuits and tube rectifiers. Wow, my experience is totally in line with Herb's, and I would like to underline the simplest circuits, because that was where I could start out on my own, because as you know, high quality transformers is in the price range that you cannot afford as a student, but you can take simple circuits and start from there. And the more tube amps I repaired, the less I admired mainstream home audio and more I admired professional sound reinforcement gear from companies like Altec, Ampex, etc. And yeah, I'm there with him with the Altec and Ampex gear. Although I really have to add that I never heard an Altec or an Ampex amp stock in a stereo system. The only ones I heard were the ones that I restored, but I never restored any of them to its original shape. I restored them with the modifications I thought were due for those amplifiers to give them the most of their potential. Although I would like to add that the mods I did on them were not trendy mods, nothing like adding like a constant current source or like sprucing it up with DSP or whatnot, or something like really that's totally alien and divergent from their philosophy. But like what their I was thinking along the lines, what would these engineers have done if they had today's parts, today's capacitors, today's inductors, today's resistors, solder, wire, connectors back in that time, at that time when they designed these amps. And also if they were designing them for home use instead of optimizing it for a theater for 500 people, because in my home there's me and Ali and the cats listening to it, and that's it. I don't need these gears optimized for 500 people or more. I optimize them for just the few of us and my friends when they come over and we have an audio party, and that's it. So let's go back to where Herb is going. But what really bugged me were the phono preamps of the time. Almost universally, they sounded opaque and undynamic. The only one I thought was alright was the Dynaco Pass 3-axis phono stage, which with tweaks and modifications anchored my personal hi-fi until I couldn't stand it any longer. And I am really amazed at this, because this very phono stage was my phono stage at the beginning of my journey, and I did the same thing as Herb did, mods and tweaks with it, and it's truly something spectacular. So the Dynaco Pass, that's also known, or was known at the time, like early 2000s when I started getting deeply into audio, was known as the starting point for DIYers. So if you want to learn about how to modify, build stuff, work with audio gear, tube gear, this was your beginner's phono stage. And not just phono stage, but the preamplifier as well, the Dynaco Pass. And eventually it can be truly modified, and you can take it to any direction you want. I took it towards a hot rod direction, so means I took out all the balance controls and tone controls, and took out, like, changed the preamps layout so that one tube stage was dedicated to gain, the second was the cathode follower, so it had like a super low output impedance, and it was all silver wired, and it was just truly I would say a little jewel, and it had sound that was just truly fantastic. and much beyond what anyone would have thought of an innocent Dynaco pass. And here we go. He said he couldn't stand it any longer, and for me that wasn't the case. I was just thinking about other things, and what let's look what Herb was thinking. At that point, as an experiment, I scratch built RCA's preamplifier for magnetic phonograph pickup with RIW equalization to see if I could do better than Dynaco or Marantz preamps that passed through my workshop. And I cracked up when I read this, because this is exactly my journey too. So I also built the RCA phono stage just like Herb did. I just can't believe it. We were just going through the same journey. I didn't know that Herb started with the Dynaco and then he went on for the RCA phono stage. So anyway, the schematic for this passively equalized phono preamp was in the back of every RCA tube manual. Yep, that's right. That's where I found it, RCA tube manual, and built it. Why my choice for that was basically because, like, you know, RCA company, they pressed probably the most of the LPs out there. So the major company and the phono stage, the EQ they used, if you pick that as your reference, you can't go wrong, right? And it's right. And the thing with that is that the RCA preamp, this phono stage, it's just phenomenal for RCA records. So if you think that RCA's pressings are second rate in sound and they don't sound as good as like Decca's or London's or whatever is your preference, or EMI, then I will dare you to build a high quality RCA phono stage and listen to those RCA records through that phono stage. And that might just change your mind about the quality and the potential in RCAs. So there it goes. Herb's story. So he made the phono stage and it turned out to be livelier and more transparent than the Marantz 7C preamplifier, which is a pretty legendary. And then he's saying, like, why was his preamp better than that Megabuck very impressive preamp? And he was speculating that he used the 5U4 tube for rectifier to basically to supply that phono stage with power. And as you know, the 5U4, it's a high current rectifier. Mostly power amps use it. They do not put even in a preamp. It's always put on power amplifiers because it's designed for high currents. So basically what Herb did is he used the high current tube to supply the phono stage, and actually that's what I did as well. I'm not sure if I used 5U4. What the heck did I use? One of the 5 series. I think I made it interchangeable so I can use 5U4, 5AR4, or any of these bodies. But basically mine had a crazy beefy power supply with it, and I used VR tube regulation. So basically I had a very high voltage power supply, so not just high current delivery as Herb did, but I also made the extra step to also make it a high source voltage and then drop it down with VR tubes, so it was a VR regulated power supply. And it was a really, really, really good sounding phono stage. So what he did is first he built it with a CRC filtering in the phono stage, and then he replaced it with choke filtering. I built mine directly with the choke filtering. So you can see there's plenty of parallels in our journeys, and I'm telling you that because you see, there's not only one nut in the world. There, we come in pairs, or you know, people think alike, and what Herb is writing is not just a figment of imagination, but it's a journey that several of us took actually, and I can really relate to Herb's experiences because mine really jive with his experiences. So now I'm hitting 20 minutes. Let's pause and come back after a little break. Otherwise, I will have problems uploading such a long video. So thank you guys for tuning in, and let's tune in a sec. Bye bye.